Eustis, Community Science Director for Gulf Restoration Network. Going to talk to you about the need for the cartoscope project in the context of our mission as watchdogs for clean water. Without independent observations, there just is no coastal restoration. So cartoscope is an important part of that in sparking academics, shaming the government into investigating questions about how climate change is affecting our marshes. We can see it. We see it from airplanes, we see it from boat trips, we can see it from aerial photos that we'll review with the cartoscope program. You know, just a little bit of history about Healthy Gulf. We were on site for the Deepwater Horizon disaster on April 25th, 5 days after the initial incineration of the 11 men who died in the disaster. At this time, the government was mostly, you know, still talking about those deaths and the disaster and the economic impact. And the environment was a bit of a sideline. Coast Guard said there were 40 boats. We just happened to have booked a flight with some musicians, some cultural producers, you know, working with them to communicate the fate of the red snapper in the Gulf. That was the plan, but unplanned, we caught the Coast Guard in a fib. This is not a picture of 40 boats. It is a picture of the source of the BP Macondo disaster, when there were maybe only 3 to 4 vessels out and nothing was happening. The flow rate was underestimated. The response was being lied about, frankly, and we were there to document to the world, to the national and international press, that this oil industry was doing a lot more to the Gulf than advertised. And, you know, our spark lit the fire that ended up with a tremendous amount of fines. You know, we as a watchdog organization were first on the scene. Sky Truth, using aerial photos and satellite imagery and radar, indispensable in sparking other analyses like Dr. Ian McDonald. This is a slide from Dr. Ian McDonald. He's been just the savior of the Gulf of Mexico. And once Ian McDonald and others really started in an incredible way taking our fire, became a conflagration. There was a video of the gusher down at the Macondo site, which enabled the independent press, the Associated Press, to get independent flow measurements, to get a true estimate 62,000 barrels a day, worse than BP's worst case, based on some of those independent evaluations. But it took a lot of time, and you couldn't believe what the government was saying. Because of that, we've had tremendous criminal fines levied against the companies associated with the Deepwater Horizon, mostly BP. Those criminal fines, acknowledging that the oil companies' criminality has led to massive ecological restoration that now protects New Orleans. But, you know, without independent observation to light the spark, to say, hey, this is a lot worse, we wouldn't have $7.2 billion in restoration. We might have just gotten these barrier islands, you know, at the flow rate that they were saying it was, 6,000 barrels or so. These projects would have been the only thing to come out of that disaster. And instead, we have an enormous scientific and restoration program. Taylor Energy, another example, where the oil company it's a for-profit company. They're incentivized to lie. They're incentivized to mislead. And now that the Coast Guard is cleaning up Taylor's spill, that's been going on for almost 16 years this summer. And Taylor is suing Coast Guard and the cleanup company, Cuvion. And Cuvion Group is mostly former, well, maybe not mostly, but it's a lot of former Taylor workers. the people that built the rig are trying to clean up the mess the rig left behind. But Taylor Energy is suing its former workers, saying that the cleanup efforts are making the oil spill worse at the surface. And it's just not true. Journalism isn't going to cover this unless we do the research. Even the government that is providing us this data isn't going to summarize it in light of Taylor's claims, right? Taylor, they have all the lawyers, they have all the PR, they have the press, they have the reps, you know, but I mean, we have the truth. And, you know, the journalists come to our side once they figure out, you know, once we do the work, the investigation, you know, the journalists will acknowledge that our assessment of the government data is replicable, it's credible, and you know, we could hold Taylor Energy to account. But we still are not done with this. But this isn't sexy flyover work. This is laptop work, right? This is just sitting. We're the guys in the chair, the gals in the chair. We're sitting on computers, looking at government data, making evaluations to test Taylor's claims. You know, is the response making the surface sheen worse? Well, before the response, it was much bigger than it is this year. So no, it's not a credible claim. You know, the laptop work matters. We can do a lot together with Antenna and some artists. Again, cultural producers that want to learn and want to learn how to inform themselves because they're producing media. They're producing videos, they're producing art, paintings, writing. You know, cultural producers are our best volunteers. And, you know, Hellas funds a lot of the arts, and people were really wondering, well, where does that money come from? It comes from the destruction of oyster grounds in Black Bay. So we went through and documented that. You know, we wanted to know the precise extent of that so that artists and communicators could talk back to Hellas about what they owe oystermen in Black Bay. And so the new question, hard question, that we want to light a spark under is, where is sea level rise drowning Louisiana's marshes? Since 2016, we know it's going to be the major cause of land loss going forward. It should have been much, you know, I think we knew this before 2016. Tulane researchers have been saying it long before that, but this slide represents the first time the state government acknowledged that climate change is dooming Louisiana's coast. And it's in this code language, right? We can't say climate change, you have to say sea level rise. And you have to undercut sea level rise with subsidence, or there's a myth that, you know, most of the drowning of the marshes is related to the fact that Louisiana is very new geologically, which is true. And there's still a lot of consolidation of the land, which is true in some areas. And those kind of truths lead up to the larger lie that climate change is not drowning our marshes. When this slide was presented, the people in the governor's advisory panel were scared, murmuring, appalled. You know, there was such a tremor that went throughout the room, and the employee that produced this slide and presented it to the governor's panel no longer works for the state. But it's all because the blue bars are larger than the green in most areas of Louisiana. The myth that subsidence is driving the drowning of the marshes is only true in the newest area of the Delta, the bird foot on the bottom right there on the map. On the bird's foot, yes, subsidence and consolidation. The green is larger than the blue. Everywhere else, and most of the coast geographically, right, even though we've got 4 categories up there, it's 80% of the area. Most of the coast, it's even in a place like Terrebonne, where we have larger issues with subsidence, it's the sea level rising from climate change. Exxon heats the air, the Gulf heats up, the water expands, etc. That's what's going to flood the North Shore. It's not, the North Shore is different kind of soil. It's not consolidating. It's sea level rise. But where? And that's the central question that we want to tackle with aerial photographs. And we know what different causes of land loss look like in Louisiana. We know what it looks like because of the work of Dr. Penland and Jeffress Williams. And they did a study doing the photo characterization with consultations from the industry. They got industry buy-in. Healthy Gulf, at that time, Gulf Restoration Network was consulted, and they produced a map, you know, vetted by USGS, an aerial photo interpretation of geological processes. So what are some major ones? You know, there's probably 30. A lot of them are very unique. We're just going to go over some of the more outstanding ones that we can characterize easily and happen in our area of focus, which is going to be the West Bank, Jefferson, Plaquemines Parish area. So these are 4 of the 30, but these are the biggies. Shipping industry impacts. Well, find the shipping channel on the map, okay? And then find the erosion associated with that. It's a certain pattern. It's an outside-in pattern. Erosion, or like imagine a 2-dimensional force, right? It's not a 3-dimensional concern like subsidence or sea level rise. Erosion is the kind of the horizontal, you could say, action of the water against the land. So there's kind of a scooping pattern, and with shipping channel, it's actually a much more intense kind of erosion than wave action, where it produces like a serrated knife pattern. It's a very pointy pattern. It's an outside-in pattern. We'll look at it in a bit. Agricultural impacts, you can tell because there was a big block, right? You don't, when we create farms, think of Illinois in the Midwest, right? You don't create farms in squiggly shapes. In America, God dang it, we make square farms. So that you can see the drainage that was necessary to convert Louisiana marshes into arable land. You see a squared shape, and that's how you know it's the pen. It's Clovelly Farms. It's a squared off area. Coastal erosion, you know, when we looked at shipping erosion, well, where's the shipping channel? Okay. You're not going to have shipping erosion away from where large boats are traveling, right? Coastal erosion, you're going to have it on the coast. It's going to be in the exterior. You're going to be some of your larger bays, and it also produces that sharpening pattern, just like the shipping erosion, although it's kind of at a larger scale. It's kind of a scoop pattern. It's instead of a serrated knife, it's a scimitar, like a large arc, a large convex kind of arc. And number 4, you know, number 3 is what the oil industry would love you to believe is 100% or 80% of the land loss problem. It's 26% as of 1990. And no one's redone this study since the 1990 photograph. It's a, you know, 26% is not insignificant, but it's not the 80%. The 60% of the problem is actually oil and gas. It's the oil and gas canals, pipelines, and the related submergence and subsidence. Oil and gas polluted the marshes. They sank the marshes. They blocked the drainage and drowned the marshes. They also extracted fluid from underneath the marshes, causing it to sink in a subsurface way. So there's at least 3 mechanisms by which oil field marshes were destroyed and turned into water by oil and gas. And we see that pattern revealed in aerial photos as a disintegration pattern next to small canals, which are the access canals. So it's a very different pattern than any of these 3, and it's pretty recognizable. Let's look at the So let's review these 4, and then we're going to posit a 5th one, submergence not related to any canals. That's what sea level rise looks like. Here we have the Mr. Go channel in St. Bernard Parish. Across the coast, across the delta, the southeast delta, the USGS study through 1990, shipping accounted for almost 5%. And then the erosion around the shipping channel, the big shipping channel, is an additional 3% and change, right? So 8% and change is related to this kind of activity. It's associated with the shipping channel. Pretty simple. Of course, those channels, if you look at them on the photo, are much wider, and they're wider in this kind of sharp way where, you know, you get this is what I'm saying, the serrated knife, point, 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 point. So that's a problem. Agriculture, 1932, we already had some things that were gone. And after 1932, I think we wised up and stopped trying to do this in the marshes. We have a lot better farm arable land then. So it's only a couple of percent agricultural impacts, but as we said, drainage features, and it's square-ish. And this is an interesting capture, an interesting area, because you have this is what I'm saying the inside out pattern is. You have this oil and gas plus other disintegration. Here you have definitively oil and gas related disintegration associated with the oil and gas canals. And you have some other waterlogging, these 3 different colors representing different categories of disintegration pattern. But this slide is for the ag impact. So here's what that looks like. It's in a square. It's got regular drainage features that were put into the landscape, and maybe it was arable in 1940. It's under the waves now. Coastal erosion, a significant factor when we talk about, you know, what is causing the land loss. Of course, sea level rise does not help coastal erosion, acting through an enlarged tidal prism, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want to talk about that, but it just, you know, USGS called this natural, quote unquote, erosion. And sure, let's accept that. It's mostly a natural process. I'll give them that. Outside in, you know, and it's associated with lots of water. This is an exterior phenomenon. So you see most of this slide is white, representing the bays, large bays that are now becoming more and more connected as the wave action erodes the shoreline. It's pointy. Erosion sharpens the coast. And you can see that when we close in on some of this. Bay Jimmy and the bay north of Bay Jimmy are now connected, and it creates these 2 points in the marsh feature that used to be connected. Right, there's no canals here. There's no shipping canals here. There's not a square feature. It's these convex shapes, meaning points. And it's most of this photo is water. So that leads us to believe that they'll cause a land loss associated with coastal erosion here. But look, oil industry activity sank the marshes 3 different ways. It's oil industry activity and either direct removal or submergence. I guess we're starting with the submergence here. Is the largest single cause, and I put 36% to 57+% because there's also a category that USGS had where it was, you know, disintegration from oil and gas and something else. So if you know, exclusively oil and gas, 24.92%, oil and gas with something else, you know, another 24 odd percent. And then just the canals themselves have a larger footprint than the shipping canals, 11.4% for those teeny canals. You add them all up. So, you know, oil and gas destroyed the coast. It's the largest driver of land loss. And this is Terrebonne Parish, Lower Lafourche Parish in Barataria Bay. You see the disintegration pattern, sometimes called hair plug marsh. it's an outside in, it's an inside out pattern, excuse me, rather than an erosion pattern. Up in places where it's, you know, where you get altered hydrology exclusively, you get these little bays and specks begin to form. In the lower marshes, which are the lowest marshes, the most vulnerable to being drowned because they can no longer drain properly because of these artificial spoil banks created by the oil industry's need to dredge and maintain navigation to get access to their drill sites. So this is just, if there were no pollution and no induced subsidence from extraction, it still has these indirect ponding effects on interior marshes. These are not erosion patterns. In other places, like the Lafitte oil field, you have this impoundment disintegration plus pollution plus, you know, the fact that we're sinking the subsurface sometimes over the history of oil extraction by pulling out oil too fast, created decompression problems. So you get this, industry-induced waterlogging, pollution, and subsidence. There's nothing left but the little spoil banks that impounded the marshes long ago. And this is where 90% of the coastal restoration funding is targeted. It's in this dredge marsh creation in the old oil fields. The oil industry owes us, you know, at a minimum 20 billion and probably more like 200 billion if they're really going to fix all of this oil field damage. And yeah, this is 36 to 57% of the land loss problem. You can see the disintegration pattern at the margin here. You can see it, what's, you know, there's nothing left to disintegrate in a lot of this area. But you can still see the inside out pattern. And then in one photo, sometimes you get both, right? You get here's a canal, oil field canal, disintegration pattern, dark water that's not filled with sediment or not flowing, right? And then you can even see the sediment flowing in the larger bay where you have that two-dimensional scooping, sharpening, erosive effect. So you've got both in one photo. USGS evaluated it that way. You've got erosion in the large body of water and disintegration in the interior where water is not flowing, right? Because it's dark water, not flowing, clear, right? The sediment's falling out. Actively moving water, carrying sediment is muddy. And so this bit is erosion, this bit is oil and gas disintegration. So you have two, and you know, I don't really talk about the direct removal so much, but obviously if there's a canal there, that's direct removal of marsh. Two major things happening in one photo. So where is the sea level rise drying the marshes? In 1990, climate change wasn't really fully considered, but you do have these places where interior marshes, you have broad patterns of interior marshes that are being lost. And it's not associated with any other human features like a road or an oil and gas canal, right? And like I said, most of the coast, you associate this with oil and gas canals, but there are places where there are no such canals. And in 1990, these features were tiny, and in 2020, they're huge. There's much more of this interior disintegration not associated with any shipping channel or bayou even. This is not a place where boats go in the photograph. It's West Bank Plaquemines, lower down, lower elevation, and it's an inside out disintegration pattern. It's in a broad area. So, you know, when you think about how sea level is rising, it's the whole Gulf. It's not a particular channel. It's not a particular area. It's in a broad area, a broad pattern. There's no other human influence, and yet the marshes are disintegrating. This is where sea level rise and climate change are drowning marshes. And these areas that were tiny in 1990 are vast in 2020. We need to redo this kind of delineation. But first, we need to find the places, and we're going to use cartoscope to scope out where on the coast we have these regional disintegration patterns without associated canals. So we're going to review aerial photographs and find these places and tag them for further review. Because just like with the little oil canals add up to be a larger impact than shipping canals. And it's not obvious, it's tedious. So the government, journalism, no one sees that. You have to have an accounting. You have to have independent people willing to look at the books and add it all up. And it's the same thing with these little ponds now. We know that this is going to be the major driver of marsh loss into the future, but it's boring as hell. So we have all the time and we have the numbers. There's so many more of us than there are journalists, than there are politicians, than there are industry people. So the advantage is we have access to these photos. We have access to programs like Cartoscope. We can identify these areas and then begin to do a land water assessment and give the total, to give the reality, to put some meat on the bones of the theories that climate change is sinking Louisiana marshes. So we know we were looking for patterns. So we're going to go through the photos and look for these patterns in West Bank, Jefferson, and Plaquemines. We're going to look for shipping industry impacts, shipping channel plus the pointy erosion. Ag impacts, you need to have drainage lines and it's a squared pattern. Coastal erosion, you're going to have a lot of water in the photo and it's an outside in pattern. It's an exterior place. So I put pointy plus water. And oil and gas, we have interior disintegration pattern with canals and basically sea level rise. We find that by finding the places that have the interior disintegration pattern, but without the oil and gas canals. So with that, we'll get into looking at some photos. And I want to thank you. If you want to get in touch with me, that's my contact information. I'm Scott Eustis, Community Science Director at Healthy Golf. Track us, like, share, subscribe. All right, peace.